All right, so now for the Falcons X Factor. So on offense, I got Hayden Hurst. So near with the departure of Austin Hooper, there are nearly 7.5 targets and 60 yards per game that are up for grabs. And the Falcons traded for Hayden Hurst, which is often a sign that they like what they see in him. And people forget Hayden Hurst was a former first round pick. He just didn't really get the opportunity to shine in Baltimore because of the logjam at the tight end position. But I think being traded to Atlanta will do big things for him, and I think he can be a focal point in the Matt Ryan led offense in Atlanta this year. And for defense, I got AJ Terrell. So he was one of the best lockdown corners last year in FBS football, and he's tasked with replacing Desmond Trufant, who was really a cornerstone of that defense in the Falcons franchise for the last 7 years. He's 6'1", he's got 4.4 speed, so he has all the tools to be a force in both the pass and run game, and I think he's key to the Falcons' success this year. So for the Patriots offense, N'Keal Harry. So it's his sophomore year. I think that he had a decent rookie year, right? He was injured to start off the year, and then once he came back, he was fine. Wasn't anything special, but I think he needs to be something special this year, right? Marquise Lee opted out, and I don't really trust Mohamed Sanu as a wide receiver too for the Patriots. So I think he can slide into that role. Get some nice targets from whoever is at QB, whether it be Jarrett Stidham or Cam Newton. I think N'Keal Harry has to step up in his sophomore year for the Patriots to have success. And on defense, I think it has to be Juwan Bentley, right? He's a linebacker. The Patriots lost Jamie Collins, and Dante Hightower opted out, right? I think he's going to be mainly tasked with replacing Jamie Collins, who had 3 picks, 1 touchdown, 3 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, 7 sacks, 10 QB hits, and 81 combined tackles last year. So Collins was a do-it-all linebacker, and Bentley has to also be a do-it-all linebacker if he wants to progress in Belichick's system and improve. So now for the Colts. So the Colts, on offense, sneaky, have one of the best running back cores in the league. They've got Marlon Mack, Nyheim Hines, Jordan Wilkins, and Jonathan Taylor, right? And when you think about the Colts, you don't necessarily think about, the running game, but I think now you should, because if you look at that offensive line, it is, top 5 for sure in the NFL, right? You got Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, Braden Smith, and, a couple other guys who really can open up holes for these guys. And you really don't know who you're going to get out of this 4-headed monster, right? Nyheim Hines can catch the ball out of the backfield. Marlon Mack, Jonathan Taylor, and Jordan Wilkins are all hard runners, but they're different runners, right? So it's going to be hard for defenses to prepare for all 4. So I think if they can get all 4 into the, involved in the game plan, then that'll add another dimension to the Colts, and it'll make them hard to stop on offense. And now for defense. So the Colts traded for DeForest Buckner, around draft time, and I think that he's a proven talent, right? You saw him last year in San Francisco. He was a beast, and if he can be that same guy in Indy, then you're not going to want to run on Indy or pass on Indy for that matter, because DeForest Buckner is going to come and he can really change a game plan, right? He's really the focal point and the main focus for an offensive coordinator heading into Sunday. So I think if he can perform at a high level that we all saw last year, then the Colts will have a pretty good defense. So now for the Steelers. So James Conner on offense, I think he's their X factor. He had a bit of a down year last year, and of course this was in part due to the fact that he was plagued with knee and shoulder injuries, so he was only able to play 10 games. But in those 10 games, he saw 5 fewer rushes, 2 less targets per game, 6 less touchdowns, and about 42 total yards, 42 less total yards per game. So obviously it was a bit of a down year, but I think that was partly due, of course, to the injuries, but also to who is at quarterback, right? They didn't have Big Ben, but I think with Big Ben returning this year in 2020, I think Conner has a chance to return to his 2018 self. And on defense, I think it has to be Devin Bush, right? The Steelers had one of the best defenses down the stretch last year, and that was in part due to Devin Bush, who was their Steelers 2019 first round pick. And I think he's key to the Steelers' success in 2020. If he can establish himself as a perennial Pro Bowler and become both a great coverage and run stuffing linebacker, I think the Steelers are almost a lock for the playoffs this year. So now for the Vikings. So the Vikings, I have got Justin Jefferson as their X factor, right? So after the Vikings traded away Stephon Diggs, there's 94 targets and 1,130 yards that are up for grabs. Naturally, a bulk of these will go to Justin Jefferson, who was the 25th pick in April's NFL draft, and also had 111 catches, not targets, catches, an 83% catch rate and 18 touchdowns in his junior year at LSU. And I think if he can be a reliable option for Kirk Cousins, then the Vikings will definitely make a playoff push. And for defense, I've got Mike Hughes. So Mike Hughes is a guy in the secondary who really is there to replace Xavier Rhodes. So Xavier Rhodes, obviously in Indy, he had his struggles last year. But I think Mike Hughes has a chance to, be really good because he was a former first-round pick. And if he can perform well, then the Vikings all of a sudden have one of the best secondaries in the NFC, alongside Harrison Smith and Anthony Harris. And for the Titans, X Factor on offense, I got Corey Davis. So Corey Davis, 4th overall pick a few years back. He obviously has not performed at the level the Titans expected when they drafted him that high out of Western Michigan. So last year, his targets went down by 43, his yards down 290. So he had a down year, and he really, if he can get used to Ryan Tannehill at QB, then he could, break out and be a key player for these Titans. And also, you think about, he's got a good guy on the other side of him, right? A.J. Brown. He had a great rookie year last year. So if they can really pack that 1-2 punch, then defensive coordinators won't know who to game plan for, right? On defense, I got Adoree Jackson. So Adoree Jackson, kind of similar to Mike Hughes. He's a former first-round pick who is there to replace a veteran. In this case, it's Logan Ryan, who the Titans chose to not bring back. And if he performs well, the Titans could have one of the best secondaries in the AFC, right? They got Malcolm Butler, Kenny Vaccaro, and Kevin Byard. So Titans have a lot of potential on defense, but I think that a lot of that will be determined by Adoree Jackson's play. So now for the Cowboys. So Cowboys offensive X factor, I think it has to be Dak. The Cowboys offense really starts and ends with Dak Prescott's play. We know that the O-line's going to be good. We know Zeke's going to be good. But I think it comes down to Dak and whether he can make plays at the end of games to, take the Cowboys from being, an 8-8 team trying to grind out that NFC East title to a possible Super Bowl contender. And he's got the weapons, right? He's got Zeke, Amari, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, who they used their first-round pick on. So Dak's really got no excuse to not perform at a very high level. And for the defense, I got Chidobe Awuzie. So Byron Jones obviously left for Miami in free agency. And the Cowboys need Awuzie to step up in the secondary. He's now going to face number 1 receivers, so he has to perform at a high level so the Cowboys defense doesn't get burnt and it becomes a shootout for this team. So now for the Bills. So the Bills, their offensive X factor, I get it. After trading for Stephon Diggs, almost all the focus is on Josh Allen in the passing game. But I think who's flying under the radar is Devin Singletary, who led all running backs with 150 or more carries and yards per carry last year at 5.1. He can also catch balls out of the backfield, right? He caught 3 or more passes in 6 of the 12 games he played. And he does need to get in the end zone more, but I think if he does that and continues to improve, he'll be a problem for opposing defenses. And especially if that passing game performs like it can and should, then that'll open up, the running game for Devin Singletary. And on defense, I've got Levi Wallace. So Levi Wallace last year emerged as a 16-game starter for the Bills and improved during his second year. And if he can continue this improvement, then the Bills will have one of the best secondaries in the league, right? They got Tre'Davious White, who's a top probably 3 or 4 corner in the league. And then Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde at safety, who are both very talented, experienced guys. So now for the Bucks. So the Bucks on offense, similar to the Bills, after they got Tom Brady, almost all the focus has been on the pass game, and rightfully so, right? You got Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Rob Gronkowski, right? But I think people need to pay attention to Ronald Jones, and I think he's going to be key to the success of the Buccaneers offense this year. So he quietly, I didn't expect this when I was looking it up. He had more than 1,000 yards from scrimmage last year, despite being in a running back by committee with Peyton Barber. But now that Barber's gone, Jones has the reins to the really all the carries, and the passes out of the backfield, which we know Tom Brady loves. So I think Jones has the potential to rush for over 1,000 yards and catch 50 balls, because cool little stat. One of Tom Brady's running backs has caught at least 60 passes in each of the last 4 seasons, and Jones clearly has the skill set to continue that trend. So for defense, I got Shaq Barrett. So Shaq Barrett had an unbelievable year last year, and it was rather unexpected. He had 19.5 sacks. His previous high before that was 5.5. He had 19 tackles for loss last year. His previous high was 8. He had 37 QB hits. His previous high was 12. And he even had 6 forced fumbles. And his previous high was 4. And he was a beast last year in both the pass and the run game off the edge. And if he can replicate this breakout season, it'll be huge for the Bucs playoff hopes, who really have to compete in the NFC South, which I think is the best division in football. All right, so now on to the Packers. So the Packers, I think on offense, it has to be Allen Lazard. The Packers are at their best when they have 2 productive wide receivers. You think back to the days of James Jones, Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, right? When they had multiple weapons, the Packers were very good. And the last few years, it's really just been Davante Adams and then a bunch of lackluster performances from the Packers, right? So in the last 2 years, there's been no Packers wide receiver besides Davante Adams who's had more than 38 catches and 600 receiving yards. And I think this is a big reason for why the Packers have kind of struggled. But Allen Lazard has a chance to change that. When Davante Adams was injured and Lazard was playing last year, which was weeks 6 through 8, Lazard was targeted 14 times and caught 12 of those for nearly 150 yards. This would put him on pace for nearly 70 catches and almost 800 yards for a whole 16-game season. So at 6'5" and with 4.5 speed, he's got the tools to be a great wide receiver. But next year will really determine what he'll mean to that Packers offense. So for defense, I got Kenny Clark, who's their D tackle, and he was one of the best D tackles in the league last year. Right, he played 84% of defensive snaps, which was up 16% for 2018, and had 62 combined tackles. He's a key to the Packers' rush D, which allowed 1,921 yards, 4.7 yards per carry, and 15 touchdowns last year. And there was no place that this was more apparent than the NFC Championship game. It's the 49ers when they allowed 285 rushing yards and 6.7 yards per carry, right? So Kenny Clark really needs to step up and be an absolute force in the run game next year for the Packers. Next up, I got the Seahawks. So the Seahawks offense, DK Metcalf. If he continues to excel and improve his route running, and maybe improve his catch percentage, right? Last year it was only 58%, which means of his targets, he only caught 58% of those. And he has the potential to complement Tyler Lockett insanely well, right? If he can be a little more consistent, as last year he had 5 games with 2 or less catches, but also 5 games with 6 or more catches. I think he can be, top receiver in the league and one of the best red zone targets in the league. On defense, I got Quandre Diggs. So he was traded from the Lions to the Seahawks last year. in the middle of the season, and he excelled in his 5 games with the Seahawks, as he had 3 picks, returned one for a TD, and went along with 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery. And if he can, become an anchor of that Seahawks defense in his first full season in Seattle, then that secondary will be very talented, right? That safety group, Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams, who they just traded for, that could be one of the best in the NFL. All right, so now on to the Saints. So the Saints, they need better production from the wide receiver too, and they struggle with getting production from that wide receiver too, right? When you think about Michael Thomas's rookie year, they also had Brandin Cooks, who came off a couple really good years with New Orleans, but Brandin Cooks fell by the wayside when Michael Thomas broke out. And even though the Saints get some really good production from their tight ends and running backs in the passing game, adding, something like 50 catches and 600 yards, which Sanders is more than capable of, as he's averaged 69 catches over the course of his last 8 seasons. So I think if Sanders can be a solid wide receiver too for the Saints, then it'll open up, windows for Michael Thomas to get even more production. Imagine that, and even guys like Alvin Kamara to improve. And for the defense, Marcus Davenport, right? So he's only 22, so he's got a lot of potential, and he's a threat off the edge. And if he can be, a force to be reckoned with, along with Cameron Jordan, then that'll be one of the best pairs of defensive ends in the league. All right, so now for the 49ers. So 49ers, I've got, for the X Factor on offense, Brandon Ayuk. So, just a little fun fact, Arizona State is tied with Oklahoma and Alabama for the most wide receivers drafted in the first round in the last 2 years. So you think about, Oklahoma, you had Hollywood Brown, and then this year CeeDee Lamb, and then this year for Alabama, you had Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy. And then last year, Arizona State, you had N'Keal Harry, and then this year, Brandon Ayuk, right? And especially with Deebo Samuel sidelined, right? So during training camp, he has a chance to emerge as an every week starter on a very, competitive team. And he improved a lot during his second year at ASU. And I'm really interested to see how Kyle Shanahan will fit him into the offense, right? Like, does he get him involved in the running game maybe a little bit? Or how will he get this playmaker open, who they drafted in the first round, so they're going to use. And for defense, I've got Solomon Thomas. So Solomon Thomas was the former 3rd overall pick, and he's struggled during his first 3 years in the league. But after trading away DeForest Buckner, there's a golden opportunity for Thomas to prove his worth to the 49ers. All right, so now I've got the Ravens. The Ravens were one of the best teams in the NFL last year. Unfortunately, they couldn't perform in the playoffs after they lost to the Titans, of course. But for X Factors, I'm focusing on 2 rookies. So on offense, J.K. Dobbins. So J.K. Dobbins, he was their 2nd-round pick, and he's a proven talent. He rushed over 300 times for more than 2,000 yards and 21 TDs last year at OSU, and even was a respectable part of the Ohio State's passing game, with over 20 catches in each of his 3 seasons at Ohio State. And if this talent can translate to the NFL, he can complement Mark Ingram and Lamar Jackson very well in that Baltimore running game. And now for Patrick Queen, who was the Ravens' 1st-round pick, and he's really fast and talented coverage linebacker, who was of course from the national championship LSU Tigers. And if he performs at the high level that the Ravens of course expect him to, he'll add another dimension to the already stout defense of the Ravens. All right, so last but of course not least, we've got the Chiefs. So Chiefs X Factors, I got Mecole Hardman on offense. So he's a 2nd-year man out of Georgia, in a little, small sample size. In the 4 games where Tyreek Hill was out, Hardman received 22 targets, had 2 touchdowns, and in 3 of those games had above 60 receiving yards. However, after Tyreek Hill came back, he didn't see more than 4 targets in a single game, and over 60% of this, and he didn't see more than 4 targets or more than 60% of the snaps in those 4 games. And in the 4 games that Tyreek Hill was sidelined, he had more targets than Stephon Diggs during that 4 game stretch. And I think what'll be key is if Andy Reid can get him involved in kind of the rushing game, like jet sweeps or something like that, and solidify himself as a substantial wide receiver too in the Chiefs' offense, while still having an impact on special teams, right? I think it'll elevate that Chiefs offense to, one of the best, maybe of all time. So now for the defense, I think Frank Clark, right? He only had 8 sacks last year. If he can get back to double digits sacks and more QB hits, which he had in his last 3 years with the Seahawks, and if he can get, QB hits maybe somewhere in the 20s, then he'll be, really a force off the edge. And, he had an unbelievable postseason where he had 5 sacks in only 3 games and 7 QB hits. So he obviously has the tools to do it. It's just a matter of whether he can, perform well in KC next year.